You're listening to the Lakewood Vineyard Podcast. We are part of a family of neighborhood churches called the Mile High Vineyard. For more information about our church or those we are connected to, please go to lakewoodvineyard.org. Stay tuned at the end of our podcast for ways you can respond personally to what you've just heard.
I hope you're paying attention. I don't know if you were keying in on the song, but you should pay attention. When we play those songs during this series, it's for a reason. Does anybody recognize the song? Is that on anybody's radar? Really? Okay. We got some hip folks in the room. We won't point them out. They don't want to be recognized. We're in this series called Modern Day Psalms, and people are asking, why would you do that? Why would you even bother to play secular music or try to make some correlation between modern pop songs and the sacred scriptures? And the reality is, if you notice, there's something about music that's worth paying attention to in our culture. And so when we look at these songs over the last year, those that hit the top 40, there's something about the rotation of these songs. There's a reason they show up at the top of the charts. They're conveying a message, and they have something to say that seems to resonate with our current reality. In our current culture, there's something reflected here. And if you notice music, does anybody do this? You just are driving in your car and like a song comes on and you're instantly transported back to your middle school years. And all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you're like singing out. You remember that scene in Tommy Boy where they can't make up their mind on the song? They're like, oh, this is a dumb song, and that's a dumb. And pretty soon they're just singing along, belting, crying. You with me? You got that scene? That's a reflection of what music does, that it tends to move us in ways that's revealing something about what's happening in our internal world. And it reveals something about what we ascribe value to, where we find worth. What's interesting to note is there's right on the tail end of Gen X, I'm a product of like late 90s music, which was the best era of music. Anybody who knows music would know late 90s, alternative, angsty, disenchanted, disenfranchised youth could gravitate towards, 90s hip hop. Whatever hip hop's going on nowadays pales in comparison to the hip hop of the 90s, where artists were actually saying something. Why are you laughing? This is it's the great prophets of modern day were the 90s hip hop artists. Tupac, Biggie. And those songs actually they do two things. They might inform how you feel, but it actually is revealing something internally that you just find yourself drawn to. Like you just resonate, yeah, that's right. That's how it is. And really what we see in music, there's something powerful about music, is that music is a way that we try to find identity. So sociologists, whether of faith or not secular, would say that there's something about how humanity works, that people continually are seeking to find identity and worth outside of ourselves. And so in culture, for those that don't have faith, the music tends to be a way of finding identity and finding a way of making sense of the world around them. And so when we think of worship and this thing we do on Sundays, it's a very strange cultural phenomenon. Like we gather together and we sing songs ascribing worth and value to a creator God. the rest of our culture doesn't have those frameworks, so they just end up singing songs that help them manage their emotions or imagine a world the way it should be based on whoever's the most popular artist right now, writing catchy tunes like Morgan Wallen and singing in auto-tune like Post Malone. And this whole way of like, this is how the world makes sense. And so we see today, we're going to drop in to look at this song called I Had Some Help, sung by Post Malone, collaborated Morgan Wallen, in which he's having this argument around what do you do and how do you make sense of things when relationships break down? When things don't go the way you expected, what am I to do with myself? And how do I make sense of the world, and how do I cope and move on to manage all my anxiety? And for what it's worth, I would encourage you to categorically reject the message of this song as being a very bad way to make sense of how life should work. Instead, I would encourage you to do whatever it is we were doing for the last 25 minutes before I came up here, and that's to orient your mind on God. And for what it's worth, I don't know if you know this, but worship music is accessible throughout the week. So for those of you who this is the one time a week that you sing songs unto the Lord, you should consider the practice of looking up music that is the same music we sing here. Technology is an amazing thing. You could just type in on YouTube, on Spotify, and you can just sing songs in your car, at home. You can just play it in the background. And you'd be fascinated at what it might do to steer your heart in a different direction. And so to that end, what I want to do today is just take a look and do some cultural comparison to modern day pop with this song compared to what Scripture would inform and tell us as a way to relate. So let me ask you, has anybody ever felt let down by another person? Like you thought you had an agreement around the way the relationship would work. And then you found that agreement wasn't fulfilled in a way that you thought it should be. Anybody that's of an age in double digits that's ever had romantic affections for another person, and then that relationship broke down. You can relate. When it comes to other things, you think about in your work, in your career, that you think you have an agreement with your supervisor or your boss, that this is how this working relationship works, and then you find out that that's not actually the case. They promised you that if you did these things, you would receive a promotion. If you check these boxes, you will get an increase in pay. And the next thing you know, you find out that they don't fulfill their side of the agreement. And it can feel like betrayal. In fact, it is a form of betrayal. You could go larger. We could go out and, imagine a world. For a second, just imagine. Let's make up a scenario in which you find out that the leader of a country, say it's the USA, say it's an office like the president, were to cover up mass amounts of corruption and hide things in a way to bury them and then gaslight people when they were to dare question. Nobody's laughing. Everybody just got real uncomfortable. As I thought that, I thought, what would be a fascinating social experiment right now? Is half the room is thinking of the previous president, And the other half is thinking of the current president. And that's why it's awkward. Isn't this thing we do called the church beautiful? And one of the things we have to recognize is when it comes to the way we expect relationships to work and we're let down, is we have to make sense of that person and who we thought they were, but we also have to get honest about what we've brought to those relationships and those ways of relating that we often don't want to do. Like, we don't want to be honest that it takes two to tango. Like, there's something about the way relationships work together that inherently cause chaos because everybody's unique and everybody's different. And I just want to break it down real quick. Before we move to Scripture, I just want to break down a thing that's just a practical framework for why breakdowns happen. And it's this thing I call expectations, like an expectations chart or how expectations work in relationships. And this is helpful because we're not always aware how expectations inform breakdowns in relationships. So the first thing we see is that there's unmet expectations. Unmet expectations, somebody doesn't live up to the agreed upon conditions of your relationship. And so we're disappointed. But if we get honest, we have to go back and look and say that some of these expectations are actually unconscious, in that we're disappointed when somebody hasn't met our expectation, but we didn't know it was an expectation until that perceived agreement that's unconscious in our mind is broken, and then we're upset. And even more so, it's problematic is that you could become conscious of something, but it's actually an unspoken expectation. This can be particularly prevalent in marriages. I don't know if you can think about this, but I have heard so many comedians who just make their money on this joke here that they talk about that my wife looks at me and she says, well, he should know what I'm thinking. And there are 2 husbands in the room who've experienced this. The rest of you are fortunate enough to never have to manage unspoken expectations. Let me give you a tip, by the way. This is just key marriage coaching. If you think your husband is tuned into the way you're feeling, you will be sorely disappointed and disoriented to know he doesn't know what he's feeling. So not only does he not have an awareness of his own inner world, but he has very little awareness of yours. And then we move to a really interesting thing is that you can run through this whole grid of it's conscious and it's spoken and there's a conversation, but it's actually unagreed upon. Has anybody ever experienced this where you think you've had a conversation? Are there any teachers in the room when it came to managing a classroom and you said, here's how we're going to operate in this class, and then the 6th graders go, I don't agree to that. You might have this at home as a parent. For us at home, we have a jar of peanut butter that lives on the island of our kitchen. Not only that, it's just open. It's just an open container of peanut butter that just lives there. And I have clear conversations with my kids to go, the peanut butter should have a lid on it. And it should be put in the cabinet away. And in return, I get a blank stare while they walk out of the room. That's an unagreed upon expectation, I realize. And so the peanut butter continues to live on the island. So as we think about this, as we look at considering how music informs our way of relating to the world around us, I want you to compare Morgan Wallen writes the music, but Post Malone sings this. He says, I had some help. There's a breakdown in this relationship he has with a woman, and he essentially is giving her all the credit for why he is dysfunctional. And he's going, all the things I'm doing, you made me do them. I'm an angry person because you're crazy. And you tell all your friends I'm crazy, but do you think I just drove into that curb on my own? You made me do that because you make me so angry. You didn't live up to the agreed upon conditions of our relationship, and so now you're to blame. And the reality is that is basically how most people around us actually think relationships work. You're responsible for my feelings and my anxiety, and if you only behave the way I want you to behave, then everything will be fine. But the minute you start behaving in a way that disrupts the equilibrium of my life, the way I need to work, then everybody else is to blame, and you're to blame for all my emotional outbursts and my dysfunction. And these are just around this is just around perceived levels of betrayal. I want you to consider when real betrayal hits. Like when it's deep and wounding and present. And as we go to scriptures, I'm not sure there's anybody who endured betrayal and setbacks and letdowns in their life as much as King David. Or if there are people, he just did a great job of journaling what was happening. I don't know if you know this about Psalms, as we're working our way through these Psalms, is you can actually take the Psalm. One of the most helpful exercises I encourage you to do, if you just read a Psalm on its own, it's great. But if you cross-reference to what's happening in that time in David's life, it adds a depth and a level of understanding of what's happening in David's life that can help us glean from the scriptures a deeper way of relating with God in the midst of our pain. And so I want to take you to Psalm 55. It's this raw, honest prayer that he sings into the Lord, enduring betrayal, somebody particularly close to him. And this is what it says. Listen to my prayer, O God. Do not ignore my plea. Hear me and answer me. My thoughts trouble me, and I am distraught. Because of what my enemy is saying, because of the threats of the wicked, for they bring down suffering on me and assail me in their anger. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen on me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. I said, oh, that I had wings of a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. I would hurry to my place of shelter, far from the tempest and storm. Lord, confuse the wicked, confound their words, for I see violence and strife in the city. Day and night they prowl about on its walls. Malice and abuse are within it. Destructive forces are at work in the city. Threats and lies never leave its streets. If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. If a foe were rising against me, I could hide. But it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship at the house of God as we walked about among the worshipers. Let death take my enemies by surprise. Let them go down alive to the realm of the dead, for evil finds lodging among them. As for me, I call to God, and the Lord saves. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. He rescues me unharmed from the battle waged against me, even though many oppose me. Lord, who is enthroned from of old, who does not change, he will hear them and humble them, because they have no fear of God. My companion attacks his friends. He violates his covenant. His talk is smooth as butter, yet war is in his heart. His words are more soothing than oil, yet they are drawn swords. Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken, but you, God, will bring down the wicked into the pit of decay. The bloodthirsty and deceitful will not live out half their days. But as for me, I trust you. There's something about being able to write and put things down that help us recalibrate and recenter on our dependence on the Lord. Not all of us have the gift David has. So let's learn from him. First, we need to look at the toll of the weight of betrayal. That David is experiencing betrayal in not just such a way that somebody let me down that said they would do the thing I hoped they would do. This isn't the betrayal like a friend tells you that they will help you move, and then they sleep through the day and say they were too tired. This is actually like life and death threats. Notice what it says here when he says this, the observation. He says, if an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. Like, I know that there's people against me. I know that there's these conflicts I manage. I'm a king. I contend with nations. He says, if a foe were rising against me, I could hide, but it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship. Betrayal comes, and it hurts most when it's from someone that's trusted and whom you've shared life with. We see that the circumstances around the writing of this psalm were when it was when Absalom rebels against David. You guys know who Absalom is? And even more particular, he's not even writing as much about Absalom as he is his closest confidant, Ahithophel. Everybody say Ahithophel 3 times very fast. Ahithophel, Ahithophel. Speaking of which, Ahithophel, along with Absalom, rebel and try to overthrow David as king to take over the kingdom. You ever notice that nobody is like jumping? Has anybody met an Absalom lately? You notice those names that fall out of favor? Like people still name their kid David, but nobody names their kid Ahithophel. That's just an observation. I mean, we'll leave it at that. And we see that David is wrestling with this broken trust. Relatably, we see Post Malone singing about broken trust as well. He says, don't act like you're so innocent after all the things you did. You see, the instinct is to point fingers, that we need to blame in order to manage our pain. But God calls us to process our pain differently, not by blaming, but by seeking healing. He says, listen to my prayer, God. Do not ignore my plea. Hear me and answer me. My thoughts trouble me and I am distraught. He brings them before the Lord and says, be with me. Hold me in this. And then we see the danger of dwelling in bitterness. And how do we not get stuck just simply becoming bitter? David writes, every morning and noon I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. He rescues me unharmed from the battle waged against me, even though many oppose me. Even in the midst of our darkest times, when things feel the most broken down, we can still trust the Lord to sustain us. That there's a light that we can see in the darkness, that we're drawn towards trusting God with our pain. He doesn't just hold on to the bitterness, but he brings it before the Lord. And then the reality is that there's many people I know who never are able to quite turn the corner on handing their pain to God so that he gives us healing. And instead, they just replay the same thing over and over. And here's the reality. I don't know if you're aware of this, We've all dealt with pain, and in some form, everybody's experienced a form of betrayal. But if betrayal becomes the predominant narrative in which you view the world, then you start to hand bills to everybody around you. And so you start to make sense of a new friendship with guardedness or a reservedness, or you just start to withdraw from vulnerability. Or all of a sudden you just start noticing you're that one friend's kind of like my sister. I think I'm just gonna distance. And it's not even always conscious. You just have ways of managing your pain where your world starts to get really small. And the reality is the enemy uses this as a way to take us off mission. That we are to live lives that are holding forth the hope of Jesus Christ. And yet there's many who get sidelined in their pain and never quite able to break a cycle that keeps showing up. And the reality is you have to take this pain somewhere. We see that in these songs. We see the song we played today is just an example of so many songs we see in our culture where it's how do I manage my pain? I just have to make sense of these things in this way. And one of those things is that it starts to create a narrative I can only depend on me. Nobody else can be trusted. And even to a certain sense, as you experience pain, you start to question your relationship with God. God, how could you let me experience that pain? How could you let me be let down? And so we begin to blame in all these different ways. And the reality is that healing can only come when God carries us through the hurt. It's only with God that we're able to cast our cares on him in a way that we're able to truly forgive and trust again. And frankly, forgiveness doesn't always bring reconciliation. Forgiveness is just releasing the bonds that hold you back, but it doesn't mean trust is always extended to that person. But the one thing it will free you up to do is to try again with others. And sadly enough, one of the most disorienting things is in the church world, there's plenty of pain to be had. And there tends to be a narrative that we should never experience hurt and pain and conflict in church. But the reality is there is no perfect church. And everybody walks into a church working out their faith in a way of making sense of their pain and asking God to do some healing. Meanwhile, every so often, hurt people hurt people. You see, the church isn't a country club where we get dressed up and we present our best side. Though that can happen, that can be a narrative. The church is really meant to be a hospital where fellow patients care for fellow patients. And when we think through that, when somebody does something that's hurtful, if we just remind ourselves, there's some pain here that's occurring in this person's life that's somehow coming out sideways on me, it gives us a grid in which we can extend grace and actually move towards those things, seeking reconciliation. And ultimately, in that, we get to walk in our faith together, that we say, are we practically handing our hurt to God in the right way? Psalm 55:22 says, cast your cares on the Lord and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken. So instead of blame, we can unload the weight and the burden of the pain on him. The reality is healing doesn't happen because we act like betrayal didn't happen. It means we're allowing God to carry the weight of that rather than carrying it ourselves. This is actually a real spiritual discipline, a spiritual exercise. I don't know if anybody has those tendencies where you can ruminate, where you're by yourself and you just cycle through, and to begin to hold those before the Lord rather than churning it and carrying it all in yourself, that we actually do cast our cares on him in a way that we throw them off. Some of us are wearing blankets today of hurt and pain shame that keeps us from living free. And we're meant to cast those on him and let God remove those from our life and set us free. And as we look at the words and compare those to this song, we see these lyrics in contrast. I ain't the only one to blame. No, I had some help. Don't act like you ain't helped me pull that bottle off the shelf. That's good English. Been deep in every weekend, if you couldn't tell. We see that the excusing that, like, it's your fault that I have to medicate and manage my pain by seeking outlets and partying and escapism. The reality is, there's a way the world will choose to manage their pain, and there's an offering of a greater hope in Jesus when we place our faith in him. And the reality is that we have to choose forgiveness over revenge, because the default narrative is I've got to give pain the way I received it. Like, I have to incur pain on that person in such a way that they would feel the pain they're giving me. Right now, for anybody who's single, if you notice this starts to occur while you're dating, you should break up right away. That's a real thing. Let me just tell you from personal experience, I had a really dysfunctional college girlfriend. When you have a dysfunctional college girlfriend, the tendency is to say, they're crazy, it's all them. Here's the horrible news. I was equally dysfunctional. Dysfunctional people find and gravitate to dysfunctional people. And when those two things bond, it becomes really, really catastrophic. And so at any point that you just manage your life thinking fighting is the way that we should relate, we should just fight all the time, there's something wrong in the patterns of the way you're relating in your relationship. That was free. That was a bonus. When I see some of these things and it comes to pop music, I'm like, this is for young people. Like, the rest of us old people are like, yep, this makes sense. But young people are like, no, life's really good. Like, you don't know. I just met this guy and he checks all the boxes and it's going to be so great. I just want you to be super self-aware that things happen in our life. So we're just building a framework. Come to the Lord. As for me, in verse 16, I call to God and the Lord saves me. Our hope, our identity, our trust is in God. It's not in another person. That other person will always let you down. For those of you that are married, there's the old saying that before you get married, your eyes are wide open. And once you're married, they're half shut. Like, you just lower your level of expectations that somehow that person's going to solve all the issues going on in your internal world. Only God can do those. And so as we wrap up, I want you to consider, just think about this week. Think about the last couple weeks or this season of life. Where is it you feel disoriented or disappointed? Where is it that you're carrying a narrative of that everything around me is breaking down and it's everybody else's fault? And to confess and get honest that perhaps you've put your hope and trust in things that are not of the Lord. That it isn't God who you're going to, but you're going to circumstances, you're going to circumstantial realities that you're hoping that things would work out if all the people behave all the ways I want them to, and I'll have peace, I'll have joy. But only God offers those. And that's why we're people of the Spirit. That we walk in such a way that we continually, every week when we gather together, our anchor points are about what we're going to do now, which is to worship the Lord, to redirect our focus, to cast our cares on him, to magnify his name, to give him glory, to ascribe him worth, Because as we ascribe to the Creator God that He is the God we serve, that He is in control, it reorients everything else in our life. The hierarchy of the things that when they don't quite work the way we want them to, don't completely sideline us. That we can acknowledge there are setbacks in our life. There are relationships we hoped would be something that they didn't turn out the way we hoped they would be. Some of you in this room have experienced betrayal in your own family, and the weight and impact of that is significant. For some of you in this room, you had a marriage that fell apart. It broke down. And it's left wounding. And some of you are experiencing healing. Some of you have walked through that. Others of you, it's fresh and new. And you're trying to figure out, where do I take this pain in my life? And the invitation is the Lord says, come to me. All you who are weary, all you who are heavy burdened, and I will give you rest.
Thanks for listening to the Lakewood Vineyard podcast. We encourage you to respond to what you've just heard by sharing a prayer request with us on our Connect card. You can find these on our app or our website at lakewoodvineyard.org/connect. You can also respond by being generous as God has been generous to you. If you'd like to give a financial gift, you can do so at lakewoodvineyard.org/give. We hope to hear from you soon. Thanks for listening.